Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a genuinely chilling phenomenon that preys right on our most basic human instinct, societal trust. We're going to explore a bunch of reports that completely bypass the rational thinking brain and speak directly to that ancient animal part of us that is, well, still wired to fear the dark. It's an absolutely fascinating and terrifying look at psychology, primal instinct, and details that just totally defy logic. Picture this. You're sitting at home. It's a rainy night, the street lights outside are all smeared and soft on the glass, and the normal sounds of your house settling could almost be mistaken for footsteps. And then you hear it. A single knock. Not a frantic pounding, just one distinct knock. And then they wait. Somehow, in that heavy silence between the first knock and the next, something deep inside your chest already knows. Do not open that door. You're hit with this sudden, inexplicable dread before your conscious mind even processes what's happening. Let's get into Section 1, the knock at the door, and the 1996 Brian Bethel encounter. The widespread documentation of all this really kicked off with a crime journalist named Brian Bethel. He was just sitting in his car outside a movie theater down in Abilene, Texas, when two young boys, looking maybe 12 or 13, approached his window. Now, despite the Texas summer heat, they're wearing heavy hooded sweatshirts. They politely ask for a ride to their mom's house, saying they didn't have money for a movie and just needed to get home. Sounds incredibly ordinary, right? Well, it wasn't. The really fascinating part here is Bethel's physical reaction. Here is a grown man, a seasoned journalist who covers crime and conflict for a living, and he suddenly finds himself completely paralyzed. Not just spooked, literally physically paralyzed. His hand just would not move toward the door handle. And when the boys finally lifted their faces, he instantly saw why. Their eyes were completely black. No iris, no white, just flat, lightless black from edge to edge. Bethel peeled out of there so fast he nearly jumped a curb. He actually noted later that the absolute most disturbing part wasn't even the eyes. It was the horrifying realization that he almost opened his door before he actually saw them. Moving right along to Section 2, a global pattern emerges and the anatomy of an encounter. Because this was absolutely not an isolated incident. The accounts that started pouring in after Bethel's report came from vastly different people in completely different places. A woman in Oregon, a retired cop in rural Georgia, a couple over in Bristol, England. None of these people knew each other, yet they all described the exact same thing, that totally ordinary-sounding request, followed by a sensation of wrongness so heavy and physical that several of them actually said it made them violently nauseous. Back in 2013, researcher David Weatherly published a whole book compiling over 200 of these encounter reports from across the US, Canada, and the UK, and it brilliantly illustrates a consistent anatomy to these encounters. First, you get the knock. Second, and this is super weird, witnesses describe an intense compulsion to comply before they even realize they're scared. Like stage hypnosis almost. Just this soft external push making them unconsciously reach for the locks. Third, the requests are always incredibly polite, always asking for entry into a car, a home, or a business. They never, ever try to force their way in. And finally, the big reveal, the eyes. Every single witness who refused entry described that mask of normalcy slipping. The child looks up, and those flat, cold eyes show something that feels way less like a child and way more like something just wearing the shape of one. All right, let's look at Section 3, the rational psychological explanation, or hacking the threat detection system. As unsettling as this all is, we really have to look at the science here. Let's take a breath and shift gears to the clinical, rational safety net that psychology gives us for these seemingly paranormal events. Because there actually is a very real scientific framework for how stories like this spread and physically impact us. In psychological literature, there's a term for this: mass sociogenic illness. Basically, it's the idea that collective experiences of fear can spread like wildfire through a population without any verified external cause. You see, our brains aren't just thinking machines, they are highly evolved threat detection systems. And the kicker? Those systems can be hacked. If you expose enough people to the exact same symbol of danger and you reinforce it through social networks or forums, you can trigger very real physical responses. People can experience genuine terror and actual paralysis, even if there is literally nothing dangerous in front of them. And hey, this isn't some new phenomenon. History is full of this stuff. Think about the dancing plague of 1518. Where people danced themselves to exhaustion in the streets, or the Halifax slasher panic in 1938, or even those mysterious fainting spells that sometimes ripple through high schools or factories without a single medical explanation. So the totally rational take tells us that these black-eyed encounters are just a modern manifestation of that exact same hackable brain glitch. Keep that rational framework in the back of your mind, though, because we are about to methodically tear it apart. Which brings us to Section 4, details that defy logic, unnatural stillness, and physical evidence. Let's dig into the details that completely shatter that comfortable psychological safety net. Because sure, mass sociogenic illness does a great job explaining the spread of a feeling, but it utterly fails to account for the incredibly bizarre, highly specific physical anomalies that these witnesses report. 4. That is the exact number of minutes a woman in rural Tennessee stood at her door at 3 a.m. watching 2 children on her porch through her peephole. They looked unnaturally pale, and they just asked to use her phone. But what terrified her wasn't the request itself, it was their unnatural stillness. For 4 agonizing minutes, they stood completely motionless. No fidgeting, no shifting weight, none of those tiny involuntary movements that a human body naturally makes. And in those 4 entire minutes, neither of them blinked, not once. Afterwards, she suffered from severe headaches, massive sleep disruption, and her dog, which had never been an anxious animal, was so terrified it refused to sleep anywhere unless it was pressed firmly against her legs. Look, mass hysteria doesn't usually scare your pets. 11. Now this brings us to a super rare dual witness case from 2019 just outside of Portland, Oregon. Both a husband and wife were home. When the knock came, the husband went to answer it. He sees a boy and a girl, both just staring at the ground. And before he even consciously processes the situation, his hand is already reaching out for the storm door latch. There's that weird compulsion we talked about earlier. But his wife, seeing him do this, sharply calls out his name. He snaps out of it, looks down at his own hand, and has absolutely no idea why he was about to open the door. The moment he actually saw their eyes, he slammed the interior door shut. He actually timed them standing out on that porch for 11 full minutes before they finally vanished. But here is where the whole rational framework completely falls apart. 3 days after that terrifying 11-minute standoff, the Oregon couple found physical evidence, a child-sized handprint left right on the glass of their back door. It was on the outside, but here's the impossible part. Their back door faces a fully fenced-in yard that has absolutely no gate. None. There was 0 point of entry. Your brain desperately wants to construct a logical explanation for how a kid got back there, and it's going to work really hard at it, but the puzzle pieces just do not fit. Let's jump to Section 5, the pre-internet anomaly and timeline disruptions. Because if the physical evidence wasn't enough to dismantle that whole psychological contagion theory, just wait until we look at the timeline. For a story to spread like a virus, there has to be a source of infection, right? People have to be exposed to the narrative. But the actual timeline of these encounters throws a massive wrench in that theory. The timeline gives us an impossible problem. Remember Brian Bethel's 1996 account? Well, that was originally posted to an incredibly small, obscure, paranormal mailing list. It didn't get widely circulated until years later. Yet, we have verified cases that entirely predate his story. Take a retired EMT from Michigan. He described his encounter to a coworker way back in 1993, 3 whole years before Bethel even typed out his post. Now, this EMT had worked horrific, bloody accident scenes for 19 years. He did not scare easily. But looking at these children, he felt this profound, paralyzing recognition. His deep nervous system knew exactly what he was looking at, even though his conscious mind had absolutely no category for it. So, the whole thing really boils down to this one simple question. How do you catch mass hysteria from a story you've never even heard? The Michigan EMT had 0 cultural framework for this, no internet exposure, he wasn't looking for paranormal stories, he never posted about it online, and he had literally nothing to gain by making it up. How on earth does an EMT in 1993, a journalist in 1996, a couple in Oregon in 2019, and a woman in Tennessee all describe the exact same horrifying silence, the same hypnotic compulsion, and the exact same eyes, if the only so-called contagion is supposed to be a spooky story on the internet? Just think for a second about how many times you've casually opened your front door without a second thought. Someone knocks, you answer. It's just an automatic reflex because that's exactly what societal trust looks like. But whatever is out there in these reports, it knows exactly how to exploit that trust. The children in these encounters are always polite, they always ask for permission to come inside. And the truly chilling reality here is that the only reason these specific witnesses are alive to tell us what they saw is because something buried deep inside their DNA, an instinct way older than language, older than human reason itself, screamed at their hand to stop before they could turn the lock. Which leaves us with one incredibly terrifying, unresolved thought. If survival in these moments depended entirely on a primal instinct overriding our modern everyday politeness, what happened